Thanks for finding the room. Thanks for joining me. There's only one set of rules for the next 40 minutes, and it's not what I can say that matters, it's what you take with you that's important. So please stop me at any time and ask anything you want. If there's something you want to talk about, that's probably more important. So let's make sure to do that. I'm going to try to set the scene first by telling you a bit about where I come from, what I do. We're going to talk about building the world we want, but if we have a look at where I come from, I represent a company called Axis. We are the world's leading company when it comes to network cameras. That's an industry we weren't even in 15 years ago. So in 10 years, we went from being nobody in an industry to dominating it globally. Every fourth security camera in the North Americas is an Axis camera. So from being nobody, we did this in a few years. We have employed staff in 52 countries, active sales in 179. There are just 193 countries if you have a look at the United Nations. So this means that of the 193 countries, every global company has a tendency to work in the same 179 countries. And that's because the rest are on the embargo list. North Korea, Sudan. So 179 countries, that's basically where you can go. So in the last 15 years, this is what we've done, or since 2005. We've scaled the company to thousands of employees. We've grown in sales and partners. We take in 700 new resellers every month. We have more than 50% of sales initiated online. So we're an intense online company. And the reason for that is that we're just a couple of thousand employees and trying to be global. So the rest has to be done technically. So this is just setting the scene. This is my background. What I want to talk to you about today is one important. We're a company with a purpose. And I think this is important for most companies and people working now. We want something with what we do. Innovating for a smarter, safer world is just what we try to do. We are one of the biggest companies when it comes to IoT on the planet. We've delivered more than 20 million smart devices. They're placed in the world's 5,000 biggest cities. So we monitor and handle surveillance or deliver surveillance equipment for the places where most people live on the planet. And this is a problem right now for the world. We act in a challenged society. Of those 179 countries where we work, only 19 make it to the list of the Economist Democracy Index as true democracies. Only 19 are set as true democracies. The rest of the 160 countries we work with are in a varying degree either what they call a flawed democracy or a dictatorship. So the question we have to ask ourselves, do you think we can make a difference when we handle surveillance in 5,000 of the world's largest cities, when we have 20 million smart devices out? This is the question we have to ask our coders and developers every day. How do we make a difference with the code we have to boost the values we believe in? Because we believe we get the world we build and we have to build the world we want to live in. This is going to be increasingly important if we have a look at where we're going as a company. Because if we have a look at what's trending right now, there are things that will be relevant for every developer, regardless of if it's Axis or any other company. Oops. Sorry. Let's try to see if we can. You know, animations are really a bitch. You should never use them. You kind of click too much. So we have a widening generation gap. That's one of the things that's more and more apparent. I have two daughters. One is 14, the other one is 17. For you guys, it's quite evident. I know you're working just as much as I am with the internet. But when the internet came, I was 28 years old. That was or 27 was the first time I saw it. So for me, it's a second language. For my kids, it's something they can't imagine the world without. I know this is old truths, but try to explain the phone book, the concept of a phone book to people born from the 2000 and later. It's just not doable. They don't understand it. I try to tell my girls, when me and my wife were in Rome in '95, we you know, the way, maybe you don't know, but I mean, the way you did it back then was if you got lost, you decided on a place to be. I mean, yeah, if we lose each other, we'll meet here. So I tell that story to my children, and they say, why, Dad? What's the purpose? I mean, pick up your mobile phone and call her, or use Facebook or something. And I try to tell her, my lovely child, it didn't exist back then. I got my first mobile phone several years later. We had to do it differently. So there's a generation gap now that we have to remember. There's a generation that can't imagine life without the internet, and there's a generation that doesn't know about it, that still can't really understand it. We have the IoT trend, beehive thinking. If you like Star Trek, I think more and more about the Borg. Resistance is futile. We will integrate your specific characteristics into our own. Everything is going to be online somehow. We talk about machine learning and AI, or augmented reality. And these are all, I mean, things that we think about. But the latter 2 points on the list, I don't think you do. There's a trend of nationalism and separatism going in the world, and that's right now influencing the world from a legal perspective. So there's a technical nationalism coming right now that affects any company that wants to act outside of the national borders. So the biggest trend we've had in the last few years is the change from a global, widespread internet into a national LAN, a series of national LANs, where we have Russian law defining what we can do within Russia. We have Chinese law defining what we can do there. We have European law defining what we can do in Europe. And we have American law going quite the opposite direction. So if you want to work, I mean, the pitch to go on the internet has always been, well, it's a global thing. We can have a global scene. Well, guess what? That's not the case anymore. So if we want it to be that way, we have to understand the change. We as developers have to be something else than just coders. We also have to understand how society changes. So how did we end up here? And what can we do about it? For us, for me, it's always been about the why and the how. I mean, what do we want to do with it? How do we make sure to change? I mean, you have to manage change somehow. You have to manage the way we work. And for us, this has been the consistent. How we approach things has been the consistent thing in every year. We've been a company since 1984. We've done different things all along, but the how has been the same almost every time. We have ethical values here. Ethical values are easy to have when they don't cost you anything at all. Ethical values are only tried when you step away from business deals. So we've stepped away from business deals in many countries for tens of millions of dollars just for the sake that they don't make sense. It's not building the world we want. We have to be open. We talked about that before. You have to invite others to succeed with us. We talked about open source. We talked about providing, not only taking, but also sharing back. It's going to be crucial. We live in an ecosystem, even if it's not an ecological ecosystem. It's an ecosystem of other companies, of other competencies. Just have a look at Øredev. People coming from everywhere, and the sharing aspect is extremely important. We have to understand the transparency issue here. There's only one lethal sin where I come from, and that is hiding mistakes, because it prevents us from fixing the flaws. What we have to do is be open about it. Don't fret, don't fear them. Be open about them and make sure everyone can take part in succeeding. And then, of course, build to learn, dare to fail. Our CTO says one thing that I think is brilliant. We are in this business to learn. Everything we do is defined by what we can learn. We build competence, that's what we build. The products, the offerings, they're just side effects. That way, failing is not really a problem, right? Because we learned something. So we plan to fail a specific amount of times. Now, this is going to sound weird, but you should understand that this is how we built a global company with a lot of different changes. We built protocol converters in the 1980s. In the mid-90s, we were among the first companies to develop network-attached storage devices. We attached anything to a network in the 90s. Axis was one of 3 companies, together with Microsoft and Sun, behind UPnP as a standard. So innovation, learning, and failing has always been an extremely important part. And in this case, this is just setting the scene. What I think is most important to anyone who want to act in this industry is to understand that at the basis of any kind of change, when you don't own the change yourself, when you have to interact with everyone else to get it done, which is the internet way, we have to understand that at the basis we have trust. That's the most valued asset for anything. If you say that you want to take care of end customers' identity, you need trust to be able to do that. If they don't trust you, you can forget it. So we need trust from society, we need trust from partners, we need trust from customers. But trust is easily eroded, right? Trust is difficult to build, and trust is extremely easily eroded. And this is going to be at the basis of whatever you do. Because the moment you lose trust from either your partners or your customers, that's the moment they start doing something else. And I understand this is absolutely apparent and evident. And I can see, why is he saying this? I know this already. But I'm going to tell you how you build trust. That's going to be at least one of the goals today. So there are some things that really make a difference when it comes to trust. For us, it's been to stay true to some value, some ethics. You believe in something. And what you have to do is remember what you believe in, and you have to stick to the values even if they start being costly for you at some point. Because you can't change what you believe in too often without losing credibility. The second thing that you have to understand is communication. And how many of you have been talking to a speech therapist lately? Hands up. Not enough of you. Because communication is not what you think it is. And then we have, again, a playbook where you make a few promises and then you keep them. You have no clue how many companies I work with that have a problem keeping a promise. It's all a short-term discussion, and when you leave the meeting, the promise is gone. So you have to own up to something, you have to stand for something. So let's begin by having a look at managing growth. And that sounds stupid, but I mean, you're in this to do something. And growth doesn't have to be a company growth. Growth can be a user base. Growth can be an attitude. So how do you manage growth? What's in it? Basically, it's the art of letting go. So I want to tell you about a few things here that are quite important. This is a theory of how you build any kind of growth phenomenon at all. At first, you have to define a lodestar, a vision, something you want to achieve, some things you want to do as a group, as a company, as an organization, as a whatever. And then you hire a lot of people. But the people you hire, it's difficult to micromanage people if you're in steady growth, because you cannot write the rule book to define what everyone should do. So you have to use the brains of people in the organization, but they need something to go by. So what you do is you define short-term goals people run for, you give them a lot of freedom within the boundaries, and you have a look at the big black lines. Those are the boundaries. And the boundaries are called core values. That's really what you believe in. If people stay within the core value ethics, it's fine. If they leave the core value ethics, they have to do something else. And core values, what are those? It could be we share things. One of the things is, if you have a look at the company I work for, we have ways of making a career in the company where you have to do more than just know things. If you want to make a career, you only go halfway by being brilliant. The rest of the way, if you want to reach the high levels, It's about sharing. If you're the best engineer on the planet and you don't share the skills with anyone else, you just go halfways anyway. Because the common good, the way of sharing, nudging it off me, rubbing it off to someone else, that's the rest of the way. So you have to build a collaborative environment where it pays off to share information. And it's a lot more difficult than it sounds. So that's a basis for this. And the reason why this is important is that companies now, or groups, environments you work with, are changing. But they're not changing as fast as you think. Because you know one thing doesn't mean that the companies you work for or the organizations you work for can manage change in the same speed. So a traditional organization here would be an industry company. An old industry company has a very specific way of learning and managing skills. They have a management team or they have process experts, and all of those process experts are the ones who really make the decisions. You send a problem up and you get a solution back. That's the way you have it in manufacturing industries in many cases, because you have, very few people who actually know everything about how the company works. But then if you have a look at a more modern organization, you have a knowledge company. And a knowledge company is defined by the fact that everyone working in the organization knows much more about what they do than the management does. The skills of the organization is put furthest out, so it doesn't make any sense to ask the management team to make the decisions, because they're always going to know less than you do. So the important thing to manage things like this is to let go. People sometimes mistakenly talk about delegation. Delegation is a flawed word, because delegation means I give you the right temporarily and then I take it back. What you should talk about is abdication. I leave power, it's yours. You decide. And this is extremely important. This is extremely difficult for a company or an organization to let go, to make sure that the organization doesn't keep the management team in control of everything, but to allow the organization the freedom to act. And this is behind every success for us right now, that we've let go. As a really important thing here, if we go back to my daughters, we want to put every brain in action. That's why this is important. If you hire 2,500 people and you want to make best use of them, you need to make sure that they actually can do their job, right? You want to make sure that they can perform. It's not worthwhile hiring them and then telling them what to do, like Steve Jobs said. You have to give them the freedom to act on it. And if we go back to my daughters, 14 and 17 years old, they're going to be, they know, they've taught me a few things. One of the things is that, with the Rome story, that for them, a world without the internet doesn't exist. They don't understand how we survived 20 years ago. They can't imagine how to order a pizza. Taking a time machine 20 years back would efficiently kill them both. So, it's a tragedy, isn't it? You kind of wonder, not only because you want them to survive, but also because it really shows how old I am. So there are many different reasons for that. We have to abdicate power to the people who have a different solution. Because if we have a look at this has been my question. When I started working in the industry decades ago, I used to be a part of the solution. Now I'm only a part of the problem. I'm in the way in different ways. So that's really important to remember. I tell all people working for me, don't move a problem in space and time. If you want to, you can always ask me for a solution, because I'm paid to give you an answer. I'll give you an answer. But you get a solution later on, and you get a worse answer than if you try yourself. So please try first. And fail, it's fine. Failure is on me, success is on you. So there are a few things I remembered or I understood over the years. When I recruited people, they kept coming to me and asking me, and I wondered, why do they do that? Why do people come to me and ask me questions? And the first time, I thought, well, it's because I know things. I can contribute because I know things. And then the same brilliant person comes and keeps asking me questions, 4 or 5 times, same question. And then I start to understand he doesn't need my skills anymore because he knows much more than I do. What he wants is me to protect his back, to make sure that he doesn't get the blame. So what I tell everyone starting is, you don't have to worry about blame. Blame is on me, always. That's a part of the job. It's my fault. But you are supposed to increase speed and learn, even if it means failing at some point. It's fine. But then I had to ask myself, okay, if I'm not a part of answering the questions, what do I do then instead? And this is really important, because there's a difference to a question and an answer. A question, a problem, is persistent over time. Sweden is one of the loosest populated countries in the world. We've had a problem with long-distance communication for centuries. Hundreds of years ago, you lit fires because people needed long-distance communication. Then the phone was in part invented in Sweden because we needed long-distance communication. Then came the fax, and Sweden was the first one to jump on the bandwagon. The internet came, first one in, because we needed long-distance communication. So the problem has been the same throughout centuries, but the solutions vary with time, skills, competence, resources, everything else. And this sends an important signal, because if we have a management philosophy where people stay in charge of the problem and the solution, and they still know what they knew 15 years ago, they're going to have 15-year-old solutions too. So for me, it meant that I had to be better at understanding the problem. I had to be better at explaining the problem to my colleagues, but then I have to abdicate the solution. Because the solution is going to vary, according to my daughters anyway, with what they know. For them, a world without the internet doesn't exist. Or a world without a phone doesn't exist. You know, you've seen teenagers, or you haven't seen their eyes. You've seen the back of their phone. And that's going to be really important, because they're going to come with new solutions. So what does that mean? It means that whenever we recruit new people, we have to let go of the solution. The 22-year-old that comes in with a brand new idea has to be let in. He has to be heard. The newest guy in has to be seen, and they have to be able to contribute. And if you only build an organization where people are taught to stand in line or to get a reply from someone else, they're going to have the same solution as everywhere else. So what we need to do is let go. You need to invite people into to managing not only the problem asking, but the solution. And letting go of the solution is really difficult. You should always prove your point with a quote. And this is a quote that's quite important. It's a man who was Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1930s. He was head of development for General Motors for 27 years. And he's called Charles Kettering, and he said, "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." So if you say that trust is a currency, insight into the problem is really the merchandise. And this applies too if you want to have understanding of the customer information, customer problems as well. How do you get a better solution out? It's by understanding the problems for customers as well. In this case, it's quite important also to start asking ourselves, what can we learn from politicians? The politicians have a thing in Swedish called problemformuleringsprivilegiet. The privilege, say that fast 10 times, the privilege to define a problem. And that is really that's one of the things that's quite important. And that leads us to mastering communication. Because we need to understand how to communicate to get people to trust you and to believe what you say. Because in a company, who communicates? Well, of course, it's everyone. So we have, let's say we want to work in Russia. Russia is among most corrupt countries in the world. If we don't want to be corrupt, we need to make sure that everyone in the company who works in Russia understand that corruption is not an option. We'd rather lose business than being corrupt, because it stains the entire company. So everyone on board needs to share the same set of philosophy or ideology, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. So everyone communicates, so we can't hide the culture. We need to make sure everyone is a part of it, otherwise it doesn't make sense. So what do we want communication to do? We want communication to add a few barriers, to bridge a few barriers. And what's a barrier? Well, of course you know most barriers, hierarchies, from management down into the company, between individuals, between roles, departments, countries and regions, cultures, of course, between us and the partners, over time. But in order to set communication in the way that I think is important for you to remember, there's a Danish author called Øredev. He wrote a book in the 90s called Mærk Verden. Has anyone read it? You should. He defines and coins a phrase called Xformation. Now, Xformation, he says, is what's not known. It's not the information, it's not the words I say, it's the content, it's what's pre-understood, the shared reference, the culture, what you know that I know without saying it, things we have in common. This is what makes sure that you actually understand who you communicate with in a different way. So it tells the story of Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Miserables in the 1850s, 60s. And he was really afraid to get the critics out. So when the critics came in the newspaper, Victor Hugo didn't have the newspaper in the countryside, so he wrote a letter to his publisher with one letter only in it, a question mark. So that's a letter full of Xformation, because it's really evident to the publisher what it means. How did it go? Please tell me. What was the reception of my book? I'm dying here. And then the publisher replied with an exclamation mark. So it's said to be the shortest communication in the world. But they instantaneously understood what they meant. So that's important if you want to think about how do you make business online? How do you make sure to do business online over distances in different countries? You have to have the same set of values, because you can't educate people every time. You have to set some kind of basic values. So if we want to go back to how to work in a modern organization, these are really things you need to think about. We have a few roles we need to distribute. The right to formulate a problem, the privilege to formulate a problem. There's a mandate to solve problems. That's everyone's mandate. You have a right to make mistakes. Again, that's everyone's right. You have an obligation to learn. But you have to define a few of those hard rules that are, you know, the boundaries. If you remember the theory, the hurdles, the obstacles, to make sure you define what's not okay. And the most important one, if you have a look, if you talk to a Swede, you get a traditional, if you have a look at a core value problem, there's a high possibility that people are going to say, well, that's not my table, that's not my area of responsibility, someone else can do that. And that's not really a problem. It's boring if people say, I want to have your help, and you say, I'm not going to help you because it's not my job. That's boring, but it's not dangerous. Because if someone does that, it means one person takes away him or herself from the solution. The dangerous part is the opposite. When you get people to say, that's not your job, this is just my job. You can't work on that problem, only I can work on that problem. And the danger of that is that you take one brain, and that's the only thing you have to solve the problem. And I don't know any problems that we face, not in a company, not in society, that are so simple that one person can solve it on his or her own. So that's the disease we have to fight. The lack of collaboration. The thing where people say, this is just my problem. This is not yours to solve. So there's a zero tolerance to saying that. That's just my area, not yours. You do something else. This is me. So that's extremely important. There's an old strategic wizard called Peter Drucker. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. He was almost right. Culture is much more important than strategy. As long as you do things the right way, what you do doesn't really matter. You'll do it right. You can tell a good story in a good way or in a boring way. You can destroy a good story by telling it the wrong way. Or you can build a good story out of nothing by just telling it the right way. It's the same with culture and a company or a phenomenon. As long as you do it the right way, it's going to be fine. But what we need to understand also is execution beats long-term thinking. And this is also a danger. Sometimes when we come out, we want perfection. We can see dependencies. We can see technical ways of improving things later on. But by doing that, we become too slow. So we need to understand the values actually of delivering, even if it means delivering not perfect. I think there are some things to remember and to know in the current world, applicable to developers, applicable to us. The first thing is to remember that networks transcend law's limit. So anyone who wants to work right now in a modern context need to start understanding how law, how legislation, and technical networks collaborate. If you want to build a career right now, you should start studying networks and law, because the crossover competence is right now a scarce resource. Few people know it, and this is absolutely a killer combination of skills. Network and law. Any global company, anyone, would die for that role. You need to understand where society is headed. I'm not sure if you know your Montesquieu. You should. Montesquieu was a French philosopher who defined the rules of modern democracy, separating law, the legislative, the acting law from the judicial law. Separation of powers. That's Montesquieu. That's how US, the first democracy in the world, was built, based on his ideas. So, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, IoT, they all work in a context. And we have to understand that to be able to affect society. Much more important than people believe. Communicate and listen. Well, this sounds much simpler than it is. To succeed, we have to understand the first basic truth of communication. And that's why I asked you for speech therapists. Because if you ask them, they're going to say, it's up to the sender to adapt to the recipient's conditions. It's up to the sender to adapt to the recipient's ability to listen. So if you want to get a message across through the internet, over a small screen, you as a sender have to adapt to the recipient's ability to receive. You can't expect them to change for you. It's not going to happen. People don't have the patience, the tolerance. Someone else who is better at adapting to their needs is going to steal the thunder. And the fourth one, build to do good. Want something with what you do. Freedom isn't a given truth. 19 true democracies in the world. 5 are in the Nordic countries. Most of the rest ones are in Europe. We live in a protected bubble, my friends. This is not the typical world. This is not the way it's on the global planet. If we want to change the world, we need to understand that first. There's also studies coming out, and fewer people think that democracy is a good thing. There was a study in Sweden coming out a while back, where only 75% of the population asked said that democracy is a needed good thing. For me, that's weird. I'm going to conclude with 6 benefits of behaving a certain way in an entire organization. The first one is we get access to the right problems to solve as a company by working the trust. You don't work the problem, you work the trust. The trust is the most important asset you can have, period. No matter what you want to do, trust is fueling whatever change you want to make. Number 2, we want something with what we do. You need to get people understanding that they don't chop stone, they build a cathedral. We want to do something with what we do, because going to work or building an organization or a line of code should be about achieving this, not about doing that. You have to define why What's the purpose? Otherwise, you have a life. Eventually, I can tell you, when your oldest daughter is 17 and moving to London 2 months later, which is the case for me, you start wondering, why am I doing this? So you need to have a good answer to get out of bed in the morning. I think this is good. We optimize for the right target groups. I think it was said great in Star Trek. Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. So we need to understand that sometimes we make a compromise. Sometimes it's important to let, the needs of the many win, even if you are not on the winning end. Don't build in any prestige, and this is important. Remove the personal prestige out of an ego out of the equation. The author, Maya Angelou, said, if you get, give. If you learn, teach. I was so happy to see that one of the core values for Øredev, if you have a look at the pamphlet here, I can't find it now, said almost the same thing. Sharing. It's open source as a philosophy, right? Number 5, collaborate. Together we learn. Audrey Hepburn said, nothing is impossible. The word itself says, I'm possible. So don't fret mistakes. Don't fear it. But for us, for me, the most important thing that you should never take away from the equation is the joy. H.C. Andersen, the Danish author, said, enjoy life. There's plenty of time to be dead. So whatever makes us tick in the morning, let's do it together. Help others do their best, forgive mistakes, and have fun. And it does sound so simple, but you can build $1 billion industry on those values, I assure you. Thanks for sticking with me. Do you have any questions more than can I leave the room? All right. Thanks, everyone.